Hello, my name's Bond, Richard Bond, and this is Curmudgeonly Yours, a show on Society Bites Radio, part of the Radio Ear Network family, supplying social interaction for the mind and soul. The introductory and concluding music to this show is La Polonaise by Wieniawski, played by Max Bond. I am your host and curmudgeon, where everything is what it seems. Nothing is what it seems. And what is not said is often of most interest. My guest today is writer John Vespasian, and our program today is Undisrupted, How Highly Effective People Deal with Disruptions. Hi, John.
Hi, Richard. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thank you. John Vespasian is the author of 10 books about rational living, including When Everything Fails, Try This, 2009, Rationality is the Way to Happiness, 2009, The Philosophy of Builders, 2010, The 10 Principles of Rational Living, 2012, Rational Living, Rational Working, 2013, Consistency, The Key to Permanent Stress Relief, 2014, On Becoming Unbreakable, 2015, Thriving in Difficult Times, 2016, Sequentiality, The Amazing Power of Finding the Right Sequence of Steps, 2017, and Undisrupted, How Highly Effective People Deal with Disruption, 2019. Mr. Vespasian has lived in Germany, Italy, France, Spain, and the Netherlands. His books combine his passion for history, investing, and personal development, reflecting his philosophy of rational living, productivity, and respect for the individual. The purpose of my work is to draw practical lessons from history, John Vespasian explains. If you want to make good decisions, you have to look at the big picture and learn from the wisdom accumulated through centuries of human experience. Knowledge is the only valid response to stress, the only formula that can make you more effective, Vespasian argues. My books contain the wisdom I have accumulated in decades of research. It's all about learning from other people's successes and mistakes and figuring out how to apply those principles to your own life. In every book, I go through biographies and historical events with the goal of extracting from them lessons we can use right now. John Vespasian, you are a highly prolific writer, and your books all seem to be very practical. Stress relief, consistency, disruption, and its counterpart, undisruption. That's a new word, I guess. Rational living, rationality, and self-confidence. These are all themes that run through your work. How did you come to write about these themes?
Because I have this this tendency to be very practical since I was a kid. And at the same time, I like very much abstract ideas. I like history, I like philosophy, I like political science. And I tend to read a lot, but only to the extent that you can put things into practice, it makes sense. I remember when I was a kid, I was learning history at school, and I found it awfully boring to retain dates and battles and kings' names and this kind of stuff. I find it completely useless. I still think it's completely useless. The whole point of learning history or learning personal finance, whatever, is just to put into practice. So what I do in my books is to go through really hundreds of different stories, biographies in different centuries, and try to draw practical lessons that we can put in practice today. And I try to draw the stories and the different patterns of behavior from different cultures, different countries, different centuries. So I hope that my books are as practical as I wanted to be, because if you just read history for the pleasure of becoming very sophisticated, you can go very far away from reality and basically waste your time.
Well, yeah, it's always nice to read about how people used to do things, but as you say, you need to apply them into your own life. What, John Vespasian, what is your daily philosophy for a good life? Do you live the type of life that you write about?
I try to. While I write the books, I learned a lot from the different stories, from examples. And there are a few ideas that I try to put in practice every day. One of the drivers, and I think for your audience is I think, an interesting idea. It's very difficult to implement. One of the drivers I find in stories of people who have been very successful, very happy in different centuries, different circumstances, is that they try to take decisions. They try to see their lives with a perspective of a complete lifetime. So I'm talking about 90 years, maybe 100 years. If you have a vision, you have a perspective that is too short, most people who become very, very anxious, very depressed when they face adversity, they have a very, very short vision. They get upset because they lose the job, or they have financial problems, and they cannot see a solution within 2 weeks or 3 weeks. But of course, if you look at problems and you look at opportunities in terms of a lifetime, and you realize that most people nowadays, even in previous centuries, many people lived to their 80s and 90s. So today you could become 100 years old. Most problems that we face in daily life, they actually diminish in perspective. And this is something I try to remind myself every day. Sometimes it's difficult when you are facing trouble in different areas. But it's one of the most important lessons from my books. And I can give you hundreds of examples. People who look, who think, and who are able to make decisions in terms of decades, systematically will do better in life.
Well, that's very interesting. Yeah, that's right. Problems do fade as you go through life. What is the key to effectively deal with disruptions, John Vespasian?
This is something that I found difficult to answer when I started to research the book. That was 2 years ago. I thought I would find a very simple answer by looking at people who have done very well. And I found several answers. But I would say one of the main drivers that you can find in people who are able to surmount incredible problems is that they always look at problems and they always react from their strengths. And let me explain this because it's not self-evident. Okay. When we human beings, when we face problems, adversity, we tend to become very emotional. Right. If you just have a good life and then, okay, imagine you lose your savings in some investment or you get a divorce or whatever, we tend to become super emotional, super upset. We tend to panic because to a certain extent, we're animals. When you see people who actually do very well, almost in any circumstances, they are able to go back to their basic skills. If they are very good at relationships, or they have a very well-established network of friends, or they have some skills, or they have some profession, when they are facing adversity, instead of improvising, and you will see, you go to the stories in the book, and we can go through several examples later. Okay. If you go through the stories, you see people who always systematically are going to end up very badly. They tend to improvise. They tend to face problems, and then they tend to do things they've never done before, to go to places they've never been before, to try businesses or investments they've never done before, because they just become very stressed. Right. While people who do well, they take a step back and they go back to their basic network, to their basic skills, to the basic structure. And this is a very, very counterintuitive move, because we tend to do exactly the opposite. If you go back to your basic strengths, and you have to know those strengths, but if you go back to your basic strengths, your chances of dealing effectively with disruptions, they really multiply.
Wow. What factors are making people particularly vulnerable today?
I would say that the main factor you find in the massive numbers of depressed people. Just to give you an idea, if you take a look at the U.S., in the United States, you have about 50 million people taking medication against anxiety, stress, depression. This is a huge amount of people. And worldwide, we're talking about hundreds of millions. And I have the impression that people tend to go to the doctor and try to expect some kind of miracle therapy or take some medication, and to try to expect a very short and very easy solution. But if you go through examples and you go through history, you see that the fundamental reason that makes people very vulnerable is that they have themselves a very unrealistic view of life. And this is something that no medication is going to solve. You can get some mitigation if you have you take some medication, so you do yoga or you do whatever. You can get some palliation, some mitigation. But if you have a fundamentally unrealistic, irrational view of the world, you make yourself very vulnerable, because you will not be able to find the right solutions, the right answers when you're facing problems. And this happens typically people who get into businesses, or they get into ventures of different kinds with such completely unrealistic expectations, because they are just moved by I don't know, propaganda, and they listen to this nonsense that you can do it, and without any thinking, without any planning, without any reflection, they basically destroy their lives. And it's very sad, but this vulnerability is totally unnecessary.
You know, I was just thinking that I see so many commercials in the United States for drugs every few minutes. If you watch the nightly news shows, you don't think it's just sort of brainwashing by the drug companies to make money, and people, or you think it's really people themselves being vulnerable as they are, not having a game plan, that they just fall for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's a pity. I mean, we all are, as human beings, we are all very suggestible. We are emotional, and this is good because we can enjoy life much more. But you have to realize that for the important decisions, especially when you are investing money, you are choosing a career, you're starting a business, you are considering getting married, you have to go back to the basics. You have to really think long term. You have to assess the real chances of success of your project. And for me, the best way to do that is to read history, to get through different stories, to understand the patterns of behavior that tend to lead to success and those that tend to lead to failure.
Sure. John, I am somewhat familiar with hoarders. These are people who don't want to let go of material things and hoard them, often to catastrophic effect. Could you discuss hoarders and their particular pathology? What is your solution to hoarding?
Well, hoarding comes from fear. And I was just listening to the news today. Today is the 17th of July, and a famous Italian writer passed away this morning. His name was Andrea Camilleri.
Oh yeah, the crime writer.
This guy, this guy is a very interesting. Now you mentioned hoarders, it's a very interesting idea, because he followed exactly the opposite theory. It was a guy who jumped from different projects, very prudent. But he always took risks. He realized that eventually he was going to die, so he pursued his dreams. If you just get hooked and you just hoard whatever, just a collector, or you want to collect houses or cars, whatever, it's not a very good use of your time, unless you draw extraordinary satisfaction from doing that. But this is very rare, because human beings, as soon as we get one project done, and this is what I listened to an interview with Camilleri and said, look, I did many things in life, but as soon as you get something done and you get the satisfaction from that, you want to do something new. Exactly. And I found the story fascinating, because this guy died, he was, I think, 95.